good news, we have some big movement in HB 957. Basically what's happening is it's scheduled for October 19th to start conferencing and actually taking steps in the case and going somewhere with something that should have happened almost 100 years ago. So basically, the judge in that particular case was like, hey, there's no reason for discovery or anything like that. There's clear history on this, so let's get the ball rolling and let's expedite this case. Basically, HB 957 is about Texas-made suppressors. They're fighting the fact that the federal government doesn't have power to restrict something that's made in a state and stays in a state because the NFA is just a tax. That's it. So if it doesn't cross state lines, that's out of reach of the federal government. Should this case go forward, which I believe it will, it's going to make it so you can make a machine gun at home and the federal government can't do anything about it. It's going to make it so you can make a silencer at home and the government can't do anything about it. You can chop your shotgun down to whatever length you want and the government can't do anything about it unless it crosses state lines. Yes, I understand there have been plenty of states that have went okay, so in this state we're not going to do anything about SBRs or anything like that. That's happened a lot. However, it differs in Texas because the Texas is suing the ATF and pushing this up to the Supreme Court, which will actually set a precedence. It will actually mean something. Yeah, in one of those states, if you do their SBR thing or whatever it is they made a law for, should somebody report you and the ATF comes in, you're screwed. You're looking at 10 years in a federal pound-me-in-the-ass prison and $250,000 in fines. So with this Texas case going up, that's big news. Now, the ATF tried getting this case dismissed, and it's comical how they did it. It really is. Number one, they said it's a tax, and the government has the power to tax. Okay? Number two, they said it's not a firearm, so it's not protected by the Second Amendment. Okay, we'll get into those a little bit later. And number three, it has history because the NFA goes back to 1934. So, what? So let's talk about these. So the first one, it's a tax. Well, they're right, it is a tax. And Congress does have the power to tax, and that made the NFA constitutional, kind of. Kind of. The problem is they can only tax when things cross state lines. So if it stays inside the state, that's out of the federal government's reach. That's only a state tax should the state decide to tax it. Interstate commerce is where this comes into play. Second, there's already been a case in 2019, Nick vs. USA, that went up to the Supreme Court arguing about the tax, and they said because of 922.0, which was the restriction on anything made after 1986, that it's not a tax. 5861D cannot be a tax because it doesn't generate revenue, because you can't pay that tax. It only generates criminals, therefore it is unconstitutional, and they dismissed his case. Now, the reason the NFA stands, I'm not a lawyer or a legal expert or anything like that, but this is my understanding of it and what I've been told, is the reason the NFA still stands after his case because his case wasn't a challenge against the NFA, it was just to get his case dismissed because he had machine guns and he wasn't allowed to pay the tax. Therefore, he couldn't pay the tax, otherwise he would have paid the tax. So he was just trying to get his case dismissed because he wasn't allowed to pay the tax. So, again, I could be wrong on this, but that's my understanding of why the NFA is still standing after his case, which was a challenge to 922.0. Alright, so that's the whole tax thing. No, it doesn't matter if it's a tax or not because the tax itself is unconstitutional because the federal government does not have the power to tax inside of the state. It can only tax if the item crosses state lines. That puts it into federal jurisdiction. And number two, just looking aside from silencers, looking on the machine gun side of things, it's not a tax because you don't allow people to pay the tax. And a tax must generate revenue. And because it does not generate revenue, it only generates criminals. That is not a tax. Unconstitutional. And it's been ruled and upheld and affirmed on several occasions. Anything protected by the Constitution cannot be taxed. It goes as far to where realistically the sales tax on firearms, ammunition, anything of that sort is unconstitutional. We'll get there. we will. We'll get there, and all that stuff will be tax-free, but just be patient. It takes time. We've got to let these people figure it out. Remember, there's a legacy behind all of this. It's been dying off. It's almost gone, but it's still there. It's dying off, and it will eventually go away, and all these problems will be fixed. Let's just do a jump cut real quick. Alright, so it is not a firearm. That is the next thing they're arguing. Which is strange because ATF, it stands for alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. So if it's not a firearm, why the hell are you trying to regulate it? Now, the fact of the matter is, it doesn't necessarily need to be a firearm. Because remember, in the Heller decision, they said all items. Okay? And then in the People v. Webb in 2019, it was challenged whether a taser was protected by the Second Amendment because it doesn't actually connect to a firearm. And yes, Heller said all items that could be a bearable arm. Well, a taser, that doesn't connect to a firearm at all. And they ruled yes, a taser is even protected. So if a taser is protected, that doesn't even attach to a firearm, it can't even really be, I mean, I guess it kind of is a bearable arm in a way, sort of. But anyway, if a taser can be protected by the Second Amendment, you can most certainly bet something you can screw on your firearm, specifically on the end of the barrel, is also protected by the Second Amendment. So if it's not a firearm, why are you trying to regulate it? And it doesn't matter, firearm or not, it's already been affirmed on more than one occasion. It doesn't have to be a firearm to be protected by the Second Amendment. I can guarantee you, when all the fat is boiled away, they will find, yes, silencers are protected by the Second Amendment. The next one. 1934 is history. Well, unfortunately, 1791 predates that history. Now they have a couple of options here. The problem really comes down from Scalia's decision. And so in this Scalia decision, he had said, dangerous or unusual firearms are not protected by the Second Amendment. What he's talking about specifically is a law that actually does have history and it dates back. But if you actually look at the law, it's about brandishing a weapon. Now, obviously, if you use that weapon and you kill somebody, that's murder. That's its own crime in itself. What dangerous and unusual is if you brandish that weapon and you threaten somebody, that strikes fear in them. And the whole point is, if you brandish it and you strike fear in them, they still want an avenue to be able to prosecute you. As a matter of fact, somebody got charged with dangerous and unusual for riding a horse into a courtroom. Unless you're going to add horses to the NFA, it kind of doesn't make sense. So what Scalia did was just took the name of the law. He didn't take the law. He just took the name, dangerous and unusual, switched out and to or, so it says dangerous or unusual, instead of a item is dangerous or unusual, that is not, it is not protected by the Second Amendment because there is history stating that dangerous or unusual weapons can be prosecuted. That's verifiably false. You can go up and look at it yourself. I even did a whole video on it right there. No, that was just the name of the law. The actual law was about brandishing a weapon. Now they say dangerous or unusual because it's got to be dangerous, because it's got to be a weapon. It's got to be unusual because they don't want a bunch of people like reporting cops for having a pistol on their hip, because that's not unusual. A cop has a pistol on his hip. But if you pull that firearm out and you point it at someone, that's unusual for you to have a firearm on the sidewalk pointing it at someone, so therefore it would fall under dangerous and unusual. Or another example would be, if I carry a belt-fed machine gun M60 into court, but it's for evidence, that's not unusual because it's for evidence. So if somebody sees it and they call me in, I can't be charged under that because it's not unusual. I have a reason for that to be there. Now, if I carry a 2x4 into court, and I start swinging it trying to threaten people, like I'm not actually hurting them because that's a crime in itself, but I'm just threatening them. I'm like, I'm going to beat your head in, judge. Well, it's unusual for me to have that 2x4 there, therefore I would fall under that particular law, and I could be charged with it. So, yes, Scalia had one of the biggest blunders ever. I don't know if he didn't actually read what the law was, but he just took the name of the law, reinterpreted the name alone, not looking at the context behind it, and said that no, NFA items aren't protected under the Second Amendment because they're dangerous or unusual. He was wrong, It's verifiable that he was wrong. So they got that, which is a problem because, I mean, just the name of that particular law goes back way before firearms were even invented. So it's like, how can you justify the NFA by a law that was written even before the NFA existed? It's really weird. So they got that, and then they got things like the Black Code, and they got the laws against the Indians having firearms. The good news is, with the Black Code, Indians having firearms, and Jim Crow laws, the only reason those laws were allowed to stand is because black people and Indians weren't considered people. So there was no actual law against American citizens. It was against a race that they did not consider people, and because they're not people, they're not an American citizen. Therefore, those laws weren't allowed to stand. Ultimately, the Black Code, the Indian laws, and the Jim Crow laws all turned into the NFA in 1934 because they were starting to get their civil rights. So now that they're considered people, while they can't restrict them from the Second Amendment, which actually is good for us because that's proof there, once they're considered people, they can no longer apply those laws to them. Therefore, what they did is they made a tax called the NFA, and that's how they worked around it. And they figured because most black people and Indians, because they're just now getting their citizenship, they don't have good jobs, therefore they're pro, so we'll just put a huge tax. Yeah, $200 isn't a big deal today, but that was huge money back then, so they could restrict all poor people, aka Indians and black people, from having certain types of firearms just by putting a big-ass tax on it. So the history is on our side here. And after the Bruin decision, they can't use the two-step process anymore. Before they would look at, is it constitutional, and what is public interest? Well, the only thing that matters now is it constitutional? That's it. It doesn't matter whether the public thinks it's dangerous, unusual, or eyesore, or scary, or anything like that. All that matters is it or is it not constitutional? And you can only use text, history, and tradition to decide this. So in my opinion, the NFA is going to fall. I think the first case that actually has a real shot at this would be the Texas suppressor ban, because it's the state of Texas supporting this, not just an individual or anything like that. Will it? I mean, we don't know. The whole dangerous and unusual thing, that for a Supreme Court judge to make a mistake that large, it makes me worried. And not to mention, I've heard several Supreme Court judges talking about what the Second Amendment affords people the right to do. And that's not how it works. The Second Amendment isn't a license for people to do things. That's a restriction on government. It's from the people to the government. So you have to look at the Second Amendment, not what it affords the people, what does it afford the government? So where in the Second Amendment is there any power at all given to the government to restrict any type of firearm? And there simply isn't. And I've seen several Supreme Court judges dissent where they're talking about that being a license to the people and not a license to the government. So, I think it's got good success. But you just never know. We have to wait and see how it plays out. But I have high hopes. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to support the channel, got a Patreon right there. Also have affiliate links in the description down below. Just by clicking on those particular links, even if you don't purchase what that particular link is for, just clicking on it and doing the Amazon shopping you were already going to do anyway. And a little kickback for it because you came there off my channel. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. See, you just need to realize that when you care about something a lot, and spoons, how the hell with it.